Two divers were exploring an underwater cave, but only a few minutes after they descended, three boys on the shore suddenly saw one of them float back to the surface face down. When they swam over to check on him, they discovered he was already dead, and the other diver had completely vanished. What exactly happened that caused both divers to lose their lives one after another? And in their final moments, what did they experience beneath the water? This is the story of the Buford Spring Cave diving tragedy. Buford Spring is located within a wildlife refuge in the state of Florida, United States. Its maximum depth is only 51 meters, and the cave system itself is not particularly complex. From the entrance to the bottom, the passage gradually narrows. On the left side of the main chamber is a sloping ramp covered in loose rocks, while to the right lies an extremely narrow passage only 13 centimeters wide. The water flowing into Buford Spring comes through this opening. The cave is dimly lit, and the bottom is covered with thick layers of silt. But overall, the water is usually clear. The cave has no complicated maze-like tunnels, and the temperature remains stable at around 21 degrees Celsius year-round. Because of this, Buford Spring became an entry-level paradise for countless diving enthusiasts. But that did not mean it was completely safe. On the morning of June 22, 2022, 52-year-old Todd and 63-year-old Stephen arrived at Buford Spring together. The two men were not only longtime neighbors, but also well-coordinated diving partners. It is worth noting that, although both Todd and Stephen had some diving experience, neither of them held a professional cave diving certification. Besides the two divers, there were also three teenage boys hanging around the spring that day. As Todd and Stephen unloaded their gear from the trunk, they casually chatted with the boys. The atmosphere felt more like a relaxed weekend outing than a dangerous dive expedition. Because they had no plan to dive very deep, the only equipment they brought was a standard compressed air tank. But once a diver goes deeper than 30 meters using normal compressed air, the risk of nitrogen narcosis rises dramatically. About 10 minutes later, Todd and Stephen entered the water for the first time, and successfully reached the bottom of the main chamber. The two explored the cave for roughly half an hour, before resurfacing, still wanting more. While checking his equipment, Todd noticed a slight air leak in his tank, but he did not pay much attention to it. Instead, he excitedly told the three boys on shore about the incredible scenery inside the cave. After glancing at both of their pressure gauges, Todd believed they still had enough air for another dive. He then signaled to Stephen that they should go a little deeper into the cave one more time. According to Todd, the scenery farther inside would be even more spectacular. Faced with his longtime partner's suggestion, Stephen agreed without hesitation. The three boys on shore watched as the two divers disappeared beneath the water once again. During the second dive, Todd and Stephen did not spend much time inside the main chamber. Instead, they followed the sloping rocky passage deeper into the cave. About 20 minutes later, the boys suddenly noticed a figure floating on the surface. The body was face up, completely motionless. Sensing that something was terribly wrong, the boys immediately swam over. When they turned the body around, they saw Todd's pale face. The boys tried to drag him back to shore, but the weight of a grown man combined with heavy diving gear was far beyond what they could handle. All they could do was push Todd into shallow water, before running ashore to call emergency services. Half an hour later, the rescue team arrived at the scene, but by the time they carried Todd onto the shore, he had already lost all signs of life. Later, at a depth of around 40 meters, rescuers discovered Stephen lying on a sloping section of the cave floor. He was floating face up beside a pile of loose rocks, also showing no signs of life. Deeper inside the cave, the silt that had been stirred up still had not fully settled. When investigators later examined Todd and Stephen's equipment, they discovered that both of their air tanks had been completely emptied. Combined with the data recorded on their dive computers, the rescue team was eventually able to piece together what most likely happened inside the cave. When they entered the water for the second time, the excitement of exploring the unknown pushed them deeper and deeper into the cave. As they continued descending, the thick silt covering the cave floor began to billow upward. By the time Todd and Stephen realized something was wrong, the path they had taken in was already completely obscured by clouds of sediment. Visibility had dropped to nearly zero. Panic not only causes divers to consume air much faster, it also leads to a rapid buildup of carbon dioxide in the body, further impairing judgment. Without a guideline to follow, Todd and Stephen could only rely on instinct to find their way back. While ascending to a depth of around 42 meters, Stephen ran out of air first. Before he could even inflate his buoyancy compensator, his body stopped struggling. He eventually came to rest on the rocky slope below. At that point, Todd's air supply was also almost gone. In a final desperate attempt to survive, he held his breath and fought his way toward the surface. As his consciousness began fading, he simultaneously inflated his buoyancy vest. In the end, the buoyancy vest really did carry Todd back to the surface. But just seconds before breaking through the water, he had already stopped breathing due to complete air exhaustion. Later, diving experts speculated that the two men may have mistakenly confused the pressure reading on their gauges with the actual amount of breathable gas remaining in their tanks. That misunderstanding ultimately may have led to both of them running out of air and drowning. It sounds like the kind of mistake only beginners would make. But in reality, many divers confuse these two concepts. A pressure gauge only shows how much pressure remains inside the tank. What truly matters is the actual usable gas volume, the factor that determines how long you can still breathe. During ordinary recreational dives, those two values usually decrease proportionally. But the problem was that they were using a single tank filled with standard compressed air. At greater depths, air consumption increases dramatically. If they had only made another short dive inside the main chamber, they probably would have been fine. But instead, they pushed deeper into the dark, silty section of the cave. And by the time visibility collapsed and panic set in, there simply was not enough gas left for them to make it back out. Investigators did confirm that there was a minor leak where Todd's regulator connected to the tank valve. However, rescue teams did not believe the leak was severe enough to be fatal. Of course, all of this remains speculation. No one truly knows what Todd and Steven experienced in the final moments of their lives beneath the water. The underwater world is undeniably beautiful, but no view is worth trading away your final breath. Because for divers, true success has never been about how deep you can go. It is whether you can still come back alive.